Wait a minute, let me back up. You tell me when you're ready. Okay. Our speaker tonight is Liza Pruiksma. She is a local history specialist with the Boone County Public Library's Archive and History Center, where she has worked for the last 7 years. Liza's work ranges from helping public with genealogy and history requests, yay, designing digital exhibits, physical displays, and working with archival items in the community and county archives. She's a 2024 recipient of Kentucky Historical Society's Education Award for the Road to Freedom panels that were designed for the Dinsmore Homestead. I don't know if any of you saw them, but she's the one that put those together. She also received an honorable mention from the project from the Preservation Kentucky at the 2024 Excellence in Preservation Awards. The presentation tonight is about Parker Academy, which was founded in 1839 in New Richmond, Ohio by Daniel and Priscilla Parker. She's done a lot of research on this school, so please welcome Liza.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. Like you said, my name is Liza, and I know many of you, which is great, so thank you for coming. I'm going to give you just a quick background on my education, because that'll also let you know how I got involved with the Parker Academy project. So I graduated from NKU in 2017 and 2019. I have my bachelor's in anthropology and history, and I also had a focus on archaeology. While I was an undergrad, I did a 6-week archaeological field school at Monticello through the University of Virginia, so that's where I got a lot of my formalized archaeology training. And then I also got my master's in public history, again from NKU, and that's where I did a lot of my work with the Parker Academy. I did do part of the excavations, and I managed the site for 2 seasons. And also as a graduate TA, I helped undergrad students in the Parker Academy archives, which I will tell you about. So to give you an idea of where it's located, we are there at the yellow star, Burlington. The red pinpoint is where the site is. It's on US 52, about 25 miles south of Cincinnati. And these are the 4 main buildings that they had there. This is an aerial view of it. The Parker family home is on the left. That is the best image I have historically. And then the women's dorm is on the right. The men's dorm is on the left, and the schoolhouse is on the right. So the founders were Daniel and Priscilla Parker. They moved to Ohio from the New England area before they met. Daniel was a reverend, and Priscilla was a school teacher. They met in 1816 while he was giving a sermon. She was very impressed, and then a few months later, they got married. They settled in Claremont County, which is where the Parker Academy is located, and they had their first child, James, in September of 1817. Education in the early 1800s was not formalized. Priscilla was frustrated with the school system and the inadequate education her kids were getting. So naturally, she decided that they were going to start a school on their own. So they sent their son, their oldest son, James, to Hanover College to get the education that he would need to run the school as the principal and to also educate his siblings. While he was at school, Daniel and the other sons, James' brothers, began building the schoolhouse. James married Sarah Baker on Christmas Day in 1842. And it's because of Sarah that we know so much about the Parker Academy. She was pretty much the family historian, and she wrote down family history, she wrote about students, and about everyday life. So the academy was originally called Claremont Academy. It was established in 1839. James, like I said, was the first principal. He was also the first teacher. Many of his and Sarah's children became instructors themselves at the school. The Parkers believed that all children deserved a quality education, but they were actually put to the test when the enrollment opened for their first session, and an African-American boy named Edwin Matthews enrolled. We all know Ohio was a border state, so they were worried of what hostility that would create of having a school for both whites and blacks. Would they make enemies of slavery supporters? Would they have interactions with violent slave catchers? And would students even come to a school if they had to go with, somebody of the opposite race? They decided the risk was worth it. That's why we're all here today. So they accepted male and female, black and white, and they became one of the first integrated co-educational schools in the United States. So let's head into the school. On the left, you see there is some stairs. At the top, it's a little hard to see, that's the women's dorm, and this is the staircase that they would go down. It was called Jacob's Ladder, and that's how they would get to school. On the right is the only photo we have of inside the school. As you can see, they were in close proximity. They shared desks, they shared seats. The quote that's on the wall, my Latin's a little rusty, so bear with me. Nulla dies sine linea, which is a Latin phrase meaning no day without line. So it meant to continue daily practice, emphasis on progress over time. The Parkers tried to be self-sufficient. This is behind the schoolhouse. Income came primarily from tuition and boarding, but they also grew crops and raised livestock, and that would be what they provided their food for the school. Any surplus they would sell at market for extra revenue. And then students were expected to help with chores. They helped with painting, gardening, brick making, etc. They had a classics curriculum, so classes ranged from algebra, geometry, chemistry, geology, English, Latin, German, rhetoric, ancient and U.S. history, and philosophy. They also had music, spelling, and penmanship lessons. I have a couple of their expenses listed there. It was $10 a term, and then $4.50 per week. Yeah. They would do chores to help if they couldn't pay that. They also had winter and spring break, and their summer vacation was 14 weeks long. Yeah. Of course, as a school, they had rules and regulations. They expected you to be on time, be respectful, and try not to have too many loud noises. But of course, rules are meant to be broken, right? So we do have some stories from the archives of several students. One story tells of several students. They broke into Friedman's General Store, which is this general store that was across the street from the school, and they swiped some of the hard cider. And then another story told of a time when a group of students obtained a can of nitrous oxide, which is laughing gas. So they were a little naughty. So the school was open for over 50 years. It closed in 1892. Several Parker graduates went on to further their education. They went to trade schools, universities, and colleges. These are just a few of the colleges that they mentioned. I grabbed these from a Claremont County history that we have here, actually. So you see Miami, Ohio, Michigan State, Cornell. And so then a lot of correspondence and school histories documented their professions, and so we had a lot of doctors and lawyers listed. There was even a chemist. So let me tell you about some notable students, because they were pretty interesting. So like I said before, there was an African-American student named Edwin Matthews. He was the first African American student. He was also the second student to walk through the front door on the first day of school. He was previously enslaved to James G. Birney, who was the editor of The Philanthropist in Cincinnati. Birney manumitted Edwin when he was 14, and while I was putting this presentation together, I was interested to see if I could find an actual document that showed that manumission, and I found this deed that shows the manumission of Edwin along with 8 others that he freed. So the highlighted part there, it says, James G. Birney, emancipate, manumit, set free, and forever discharge from the condition of slavery, Edwin, a boy 14 years old, this second day of June, 1834. After he was freed, he went to get an apprenticeship with a blacksmith, and he continued to work there as he attended the Parker Academy. Another notable student was Eliza Archer Connor. She started her education through homeschooling, but at a young age, her mom decided to send her to the Parker Academy. When she was 13, the Parker family created a rule where they had to be quiet during study sessions. And Eliza didn't like that, so she rebelled and completely left the school. She eventually graduated from Antioch College in 1861. She became a symbol for women's rights, advocating for equal pay. Her sister attended the academy as well, and we have notes documenting her paying for her sister's tuition. She was also a teacher, and she discussed with the Parker family several times that she implemented some of the same rules that they used for the school, the same rules that she rebelled against. She was also a journalist for the Saturday Evening Post and the Revolution, and she went on to marry a fellow Parker Academy student. Lastly, does anybody recognize who this is? Obviously the name is up there. Do you guys know that? So Henry Clark Corbin, he went to the school. When the Civil War broke out, he was actually teaching at another local school. He volunteered to be second lieutenant in the 83rd Ohio Infantry, and 1 month later he was transferred to the 79th Infantry. In 1863, he became major of the 14th Infantry Regiment of the United States Colored Troops. He was later promoted to colonel. He led his troops into battles such as Decatur and Nashville. After the war, he moved to D.C. and served at the White House. He reached the rank of lieutenant general in 1906, and then he died 3 years later in 1909 and is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Okay, so a little then and now. Saw the photo before of the family home, and then a similar photo of present day. And here's a close-up. The women's dorm, and it today. Those are the only two still standing. The men's dorm and the schoolhouse took on too much damage during the 1937 flood and obvious just deterioration over time. So this is what it looks like today. That's our archaeological site. Okay, so the research. NKU received a grant from the National Science Foundation to conduct research into the school's history through archival and archaeological analysis. It was joint work between the anthropology and the history departments, as well as the Masters in Public History program. Excavations occurred between 2015 and 2017. Through the grant, we were able to preserve hundreds of documents that were donated by a Parker family descendant, and they are on temporary loan at NKU now. So with any research, you have a research question. So what we wanted to know was, how did the Parker family and their school promote equality? And so we looked at the material culture and documentation to get the answer. So we'll look at the archaeology. So a reminder of what the schoolhouse and the men's dorm look like. This is our site map. This is an aerial, so that area that's got the dashed line, that's where the schoolhouse stood, and then to the left would have been the men's dorm. The arrows are pointing in which way the ground is going, so it's going down. There's a big ditch there. And then where that solid line at the bottom, that's a ridge, and then it goes downhill from there. So over 3 seasons, we opened over 25 units, and we were able to divide the site into 3 areas. So areas 1 and 3 are obviously the men's dorm and the schoolhouse. We got that from photographic evidence. Area 2 was a multi-use area. You saw from the photos that they used it for crops. Plowing obviously over time churns up the dirt, everything gets out of context. But they did have a midden back there, so a garbage pit, as well as evidence of cooking back there. So there was burnt stuff, burnt soil, burnt artifacts that we had found. So we asked ourselves some other questions. Were they following the rules? What materials did they use to operate the school? And what did they eat? So just a few other things that would help us tell about daily life there. We had a wide variety of artifacts that help answer these questions and to understand what behavioral patterns were like across the site. When we analyzed this, what we did was we looked at the abundant artifacts to see what was most common, what we had the most of, as well as diagnostic or unique artifacts. So let's look at each area. So the men's dorm, that was built after the school. The school was the first building to be built. The men's dorm had more rocks used for construction compared to the brick used in the school. This may indicate that they were either low on materials or even low on funds, so they used what they had available. Animal bones from poultry and pigs, they were either eating at the dorm or while they were building it. There were toys. You can see partial porcelain doll face there. Dolls could have been used for comfort. There were some runaways. There were, enslaved, formerly enslaved. There were runaway kids who just wanted education, or just kids that were just far from home. And there were also pipe fragments, alcohol bottles, old coins, and marbles. The regulations that we had said that students were prohibited to conduct any act that will endanger life or health. So that obviously includes smoking, drinking, and some would argue gambling. So it does seem like when they were out of sight of authority that they did kind of bend the rules. Obviously we have that from the stories, and now we have that with material culture. At the schoolhouse, construction material, there was a lot of metal, an abundance of brick remnants, and even a doorknob, which you see in the 2 photos in the middle. Clothing material was found, so there's a dress eye clasp and even buttons. The bottom left is a button of a bigger dog and 2 puppies. I found that, I thought it was pretty cool. And there was also an old musket ball. The Parker family did document that they were visited by slave hunters, so this could have been evidence of the times. And then behind the school, this area accounts for 86% of the site's entire ceramic assemblage. Students were asked to bring their own bedding and utensils. You can see a spoon on the top right. So wouldn't be surprised if they brought their own plates, and there would be mix match types there. We were finding feather edge, copper tea leaf, Rockingham ware, transfer ware. There was a wide variety of ceramics. There were more toys found, a harmonica reed, and more porcelain doll parts. And there was also school supplies, so tablet with lines and slate pencils. The archive had a wide variety of documents. There was hundreds of correspondence. And a lot of these letters came from the Parker family members between each other as they traveled and things like that. But there were also letters from former students, parents of students, and even colleagues. So a couple stories of letters that we found. One letter was received from Monrovia, Liberia, which is the farthest document that we have from there. Monrovia was named for President James Monroe. The colony that was set up there was an alternative to abolition. It was a way for the American Colonization Society to promote the idea to free enslaved blacks, but have them a place set aside for them to resettle. It was voluntary for them to do that, but ultimately it was a form of segregation. But the letter that was written there, it's interesting, was written by James Milton Turner. He was the first African American to serve in the U.S. Diplomatic Corps. He was writing to the Parker family in 1871. In 1871, he was appointed Consul General to Liberia, and between 1871 and 1878, he lived in Monrovia, and it was during that time that he wrote the letter to the Parker family. He was inquiring about his daughter who was going to the school there. Her name was Lily Bell, and he did mention a little bit about his work that he was doing there. Another letter came from John G. Fee. He was the founder of Berea College, which was the first interracial and co-educational college in the state. So as you can imagine, when he started that school, there were many people who didn't agree with him, right? In 1859, these people ran Fee and other Bereans out of the county. Fee and his family found refuge with the Parker family. They lived with them for 2 years. Fee even enrolled his children into the academy. After the family returned home, they did stay in touch and they continued to share their views and ideas. So to get a clearer picture and to answer the same questions that we had with the archaeology, I read, me personally, through over 300 documents. I gathered terms based on 6 categories to give us a better look at daily life at the school. These categories were food, livestock, chores, living conditions, structures, classes, music, and race and gender. I gathered 961 terms and looked at the most abundant terms and diagnostic terms, just like I did with the material culture. From these terms, food, livestock, and classes, music had the most terms, as you can see in this graph, which makes sense because subsistence and education was their primary concern, right? What we learned from the most frequent words, staples in their diet, so potatoes and corn. They had other outbuildings in addition to those 4 main buildings, including a greenhouse and a mill. Important chores were plowing and painting. And a key word that they used was lyceum, which is a place for open discussion and lectures, and that's how they saw their school. They didn't use the schoolhouse just for classes. They did have people that came through, other reverends, other abolitionists came through, and they did have open discussion there. And then apples was also a frequent term. So they must have had a lot of apples in their diet. Race and gender terms only accounted for 6% of the total terms gathered. Phrases of the time, such as colored and slave, were used, but not in any increased frequency over any other terms. The Parker families usually just referred to their students as both sexes. They would say batch boy or batch girl would be short for bachelor. Where the men's dorm was, they would call that batch row. So they would refer to their students like that, or just simply by their name. They would just say their name. And music, religion, and composition classes were also mentioned the most for the classes. There was no shortage of unique terms. There was a letter in 1869 that mentioned ice cream. That was a popular homemade treat at the time, so it was really cool to see that the school was able to have something nice for the students, right? And then the other unique one that stuck out to me while I was doing my research was union dinner. This was like a potluck, and James, who was the principal, described it in an 1873 letter as had a union dinner. That is, the batch boys and girls brought into the dining room their several contributions and filled one large table. So it was in 1873, so after the Civil War, but they were still doing the practice of everybody comes together and has, you know, meals together and joins at one table. So based on all that, we were able to learn things such as construction of the school, what they grew and what they ate, what was taught, and some really in-depth stories about who the students were. We know that tuition and boarding fees were the same for everyone. All students received the same education. Boarding was only separated by gender. They ate together, did chores together. The Parker family taught, housed, and protected all of their students. And so we believe that the school was truly integrated and promoted equality. Thank you.
So, did you come across any documentation of like students who had scholarship or work study or, you know, that kind of stuff? Or did everybody pretty much pay tuition?
It wasn't a specific scholarship or like grant.
Right.
If they weren't able to afford it, they just chipped in more with chores. Yeah, they would help more. That's the only documentation I have on that. Yeah. Any other questions?
How many students did they have at one time?
Oh
You
gosh,
know?
I don't remember.
I'm
I
sure
don't.
it fluctuated, but.
It did, yeah. Obviously during the Civil War, it went down
Right.
for obvious reasons, but also a lot of the students went to fight, black and white.
Sure.
Yeah, so their went down then, and the family, even how many family members were at the school at one time, that fluctuated because they fought as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So with their philosophy, did they participate in the Underground Railroad in terms of helping to move escaped slaves?
So I can't, it's been a while since I've worked on this, so I can't remember any specific names, but we did have stories of them hiding some people as they were on their way. And then they would have the slave catchers come to the front door asking like, hey, do you know where this person is? I can't give any specific details because it's been so long, and I didn't have access to the archive to do before this. But they did, yes, they did have a few people come and hide there. And I think they had, in addition to these 4 buildings, they might have had like another barn, which was a little further back. I did find an atlas that showed the general store that was across the street, and this property was a little longer than what it is today. And I think they had a barn there that somebody hid in, if I'm remembering
Are they
correctly.
like right on the road now?
Yes.
Were they then?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a little bit more land between the river and the road now, because there was a lot more properties there when I looked at that map. But they were really close. I mean, it's walking
So
distance.
if
It's
somebody crossed the river, they would have been
right there. They were right there. Yeah.
Wow, that's super interesting.
Mhm.
When was the women's dorm built? Do you know? It looks later.
It is.
Later? Okay.
Yeah, it's much later.
And they had like the big, maybe multi-purpose rooms? and-
Yeah, and actually that house ended up becoming some vacation home
Okay.
that people would come here, and they talked about the Parkers having had a integrated school before. So people would come, I mean, there were postcards, like this is from a postcard. They had, it said, would they call it Claremontville?
Yeah.
So they had like Claremontville vacation home, and they would stay there. It was like a Airbnb.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back then.
Summer, was
Yeah.
that kind of-
Yeah, and then in the 60s, they added a pool.
Was the Lyceum, was that like, would people who weren't students come?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So almost, was that around the same time as the Lane? No, that was later than the Lane debates. A little bit later, yeah.
I think it was later.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. They were
Because
inspired.
They were hanging out with fee, I mean, they
Yes.
were having some discussions.
They were, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay.
Any other questions?
That's super interesting.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to be able to go back and look at the history and the research that I did.
I have one more question.
Yes.
What was the most interesting thing in terms of artifacts that you found? Or that you found?
Artifacts.
I would say the button one.
I was really excited to find that
I love the
button.
button.
And it's really fun finding things like that, like the button or an intact bottle in situ, which is in the ground as you're excavating. And that button was one of them. There was another button that had an eagle on it, which looked very military. Yeah. There was other forms of ammo that was found. I think, well, I like the copper tea leaf. I have my own collection of that at home because I've found so much of that at excavations that I've done. Because when I was at Monticello, it was an African American enslaved site that I did, and there was copper tea leaf there as well. So I like to collect that too. But I think one of the really cool things was either the harmonica pieces or that piece of slate that had the lines just perfectly drawn across because they were practicing whatever, either math or writing or penmanship.
Was there, I would think that there would be a lot of troop movement through there during the Civil War, so there probably were a lot of just drop things.
Yes,
There
yeah.
wasn't any sort of action there, was there? I didn't think so.
No, just the random, slave catcher coming, and and they would have some words. There was never any letters saying that they had any violence with the slave catchers. Yeah, they did have quite a few people in the area that did back them up. They knew what they were doing. So they would go to market with these kids, help them sell stuff. So they knew they were there. They knew they were integrated. But they didn't say anything about any people in New Richmond acting out against them. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks again.